Welcome to the Masculine Psychology Podcast, where we answer key questions in dating, relationships, success, and fulfillment, and explore the psychology of masculinity. Now, here's your host, world-renowned therapist and life coach, David Tien.
I'm David Tien, and welcome to the Masculine Psychology Podcast. In the previous podcast, I covered why it's so difficult for entrepreneurial achievers to experience unconditional love and to create unconditional love relationships and intimate relationships. And we explored why the more successful you are in worldly or material terms, the more difficult it is for you to experience real love, unconditional love, because real love is predicated on accepting all the parts of you, including the parts of you that are holding vulnerability and that the striving achiever parts might consider to be weak or less than. And that these are the parts of ourselves that the achieving parts, the striving parts, want to disown or exile or cut off or make go away or kill in order to achieve these outsized goals. And very often, the symptom of repression is the material success on the outside. Not always, but often. There are, of course, ways of excelling that don't require repression. I gave examples in the last episode of flow activities and flow states, and how achievement can be a much more natural expression of who you are and what you enjoy doing. But very often, the material success on the outside, the external success, is the result of a torturous process of beating yourself up, of using an over-reliance on discipline and willpower to get to that end goal. And then finding that even when you do achieve that end goal, it's not nearly as fulfilling as you were hoping, and you didn't get the experiences and the emotions that you're really wanting all along, the experience or emotion of love or of acceptance or of self-worth. So in the last episode, we covered the main reasons, or some of the main reasons why this is the case. We explored childhood dynamics. I introduced the four major questions, the four powerful, incisive questions to get started on exploring your childhood dynamics. And we looked at who you ended up becoming, who you ended up deciding to become, the pleaser or the rebel, and how tired you must be if you're far along in that entrepreneurial journey or that journey of material success. And the third point about caretaking your parents' emotions. And in this episode, we're going to dive even deeper and help you, hopefully, to see a different perspective on success, on worldly material success. And this episode, just like the last one, is aimed at I have a particular profile of clients who have become more and more common in my work over the past several years. And these are not just the conventional achiever who does well in school and gets a good job and climbs up the corporate ladder or the success ladder. These are much more outsized success in the sense of they take higher risks, and they often excel outside the conventional standards or the conventional pathways of success, either dropping out of university or starting their own company early on or getting that sales and marketing experience as teenagers, or just pushing the envelope of their threshold of risk and of uncertainty and so forth. And most of the time, by the time they find me, they have already experienced incredible success, exiting or IPOing from companies that they founded, or have helped in a major way succeed at the level or the tune of triple-digit millions or billions of dollars. And I always generally meet them when they're in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, and sometimes even as early as their late 20s, as is the case with the client I shared about in the last episode. And by the time these clients come to me, they're at a stage in their lives where, because of their success, worldly material success, just getting sex or getting attraction isn't as much of an issue, if it's not even an issue at all, really. And that instead, now they're looking for a relationship of unconditional love or of intimacy. And they're finding a lot of trouble creating or sustaining an intimate relationship. And they're getting on in years, even though they've had this great, incredible level of material success that they've worked really hard for and sacrifice a lot of their personal life for. And yet at the end of that, their bank account's a lot bigger, or their portfolio's a lot stronger in material terms, but in emotional terms or psychological terms, they're just as empty as they were before, if not worse. And they're often despairing because the conventional ways of going about creating and sustaining a love relationship don't seem to be working for them. And they're right about that in many ways, it's actually harder for them because of how much energy these parts that they have, that are these entrepreneurial achiever parts, how much energy they have in repressing the vulnerability, which is often equated to weakness, and the whole worldview, their value system, which actually prevents the experience of unconditional love. And they may not notice that until a certain point in their intimate relationship, when they reach that point. But it's an inevitable point. They will always reach that point. And then they're faced with a life without love. And some of them discover me quite late in their lives, after a divorce or two already. And I'm, in a way, their last-ditch effort or their last resort. And luckily, I have now come to specialize in this sort of work and have been able to right the ship. And as long as they have breath in their body, it's still possible, there's still plenty of time to find love in their hearts and to create a relationship of love and experience unconditional love. And I hope that by the end of this episode, you too will share in this hope that I can have for them. Because without the hope, they're actually facing the stark reality of their lives, which is that despite how much they strive in their lives, the harder they work, the more they will actually drive love away from their lives. And they have no idea that it's happening. The lie that they've bought into is what I call the value-love myth. And when you buy into that myth, you actually end up experiencing a life where no matter what relationship you get into, no matter what woman, no matter how perfect she seems at the beginning, because of your value system and your worldview, it will poison that very relationship, regardless of the woman. She can have all of her own faults, and she might actually also be poisoning it from her end. But you will be poisoning it from your end, guaranteed. If you, like most entrepreneurial achievers, share in the value-love myth, and if you haven't done the healing and unburdening work in the therapeutic process. And this value-love myth is really simple, and it's very common. And it's often what drives a lot of the toxic, neurotic achieving and striving that unfortunately is the engine for much of the entrepreneurial activity that you see in the world. But again, it's not the only way that you can achieve at that high level, but it's the most common way. And the big lie that the value-love myth spreads is that your worth for love is dependent on your value, dependent on the value you bring, or the value you can create, or the value you possess. And you end up, when you pursue love in that way, by bringing value, or presenting value, or possessing value, in order to earn love, you end up sabotaging and undermining love itself. And you end up with value love. It's a play on words, it's a pun. But it's not real love. It's a transactional love, conditional love. It's that empty love, that poisonous love, the desiccated type of love that doesn't satiate, doesn't fulfill, doesn't fill that need that we all have for love, which is unconditional. And if you've listened to other episodes before, hopefully the ones on unconditional love, you'll know that the experience of unconditional love is dependent on first coming from yourself, love for yourself, and from that foundation, being able to give love to others. And unfortunately, with the value-love myth, the entrepreneurial achiever buys into this myth that their self-worth is based on performance or based on possessions or attributes. So we call these performance-based self-esteem or self-worth, possession-based self-worth, attribute-based self-worth. And when it comes to a relationship, this bleeds over into other-based self-worth. So that your self-worth, no matter how amazing you were in your career and professional achievements, when it comes to finally being worthy of love, which is at the bottom of it all, the thing that you're most looking for and yearning for underneath it all, underneath all that striving for significance, etc., that it ends up being the other person is dictating to you whether you, in fact, will experience this love and are worthy of it. And this ends up becoming other-based self-worth. And this whole value-love myth, the connection between value and love, that your worthiness of love is dependent on your value that you create or that you bring or that you possess, either material possessions or attributes, is a great lie that destroys the possibility of love entirely. And all of these other type of self-worth, performance-based, possession-based, attribute-based, other-based, I contrast these toxic types of self-worth with healthy self-worth. So for the rest of this episode, I'll be introducing to you 3 distinctions that hopefully will help you to see what it could be like to live free of the value-love myth. Hopefully helping you to see a new value system that will lead to love. Okay, so let's look at the point of life first. And I'll walk you through an abridged version of an exercise that has proven helpful to some of my clients, not all, but many. So I'll start with this one. And if it doesn't work for you, that's okay. I've got 2 other points to make, but this is a really powerful one. And it's an exercise I do almost every day, at least once a week. And I'll just lead you through it real quick here because I do have a longer version of it that's more meditative with some background music and sounds to help you get more into a reflective state. But I'll just introduce to you the general concepts here. And these are end-of-life questions. And you can find exercises like this throughout human history that go back over 2,000 years. You can find it in Stoic philosophy and Stoic writings. You can find it in Buddhist writings, in Taoist writings. Anyway, so there's a lot of precedent for this, and I'll just share a quick version of it that maybe you can get started on right away just through this episode. Okay, these are end-of-life questions that help you get to the point of your life, the meaning of your life, beyond these, what I call superficial, but I know many entrepreneurial achievers would consider to be the most important legacies of their lives, how they will be written about in textbooks and how others will think about them, and where they base their own self-worth on the significance they derive from their achievements and accomplishments and the creations that they've left on this planet and not seeing the bigger picture. So hopefully by taking, I'm actually not going to zoom out to the bigger picture. I'm going to zoom in to the micro to help you see this. Okay, so let's look at some end-of-life questions. So just as a kind of thought experiment, and by the way, the more that you really reflect and make these questions I'm about to ask you your reality, the more that you're able to imagine them as being real, the more powerful this exercise will be for you. Okay, so imagine this. You have been given a year left to live, 365 days of life. You will hold the same capabilities, capacities, abilities that you have now, physically, mentally, emotionally, for the entire year. How will you spend this year? What aspects of yourself will you give to those around you? And what aspects will you let go of? You now have 1 month left to live. You have been gifted 31 full days. How will you spend this last month? How will you show up every day? What will you let go of in yourself? What aspects of yourself will you give to others? Now imagine you now have 1 day left to live. 24 final hours. How will you spend this day, and with whom? What qualities of yourself will you offer to others in this 1 day? What would no longer matter to you? And what would matter most? It is now your final minute of life. 60 short seconds. Who is with you? What should they know? What do you need to thank them for? And what aspects of yourself do you offer them in remembrance? Okay, so that was a really quick exercise. And I tried to pause there between each scenario to help you think and reflect on these really powerful questions about the end of life. And for most entrepreneurial achievers, those who are neurotically striving in a toxic kind of way, their striving, their achievement is to avoid ever having to face these scenarios and face these questions where you've run out of time to achieve that self-worth that's always eluding you because it's never enough. It's never enough to be ultimately worthy of the love that didn't come through. We experienced or explored this in the last episode through your childhood experiences. You're trying to recreate that now as an adult and in kind of desperation, and it's never enough. And these end-of-life questions hasten that inevitable experience of coming to the end of your life that we all will at some point have to face. And some of us don't even get the luxury of it because we have a sudden death. So it's actually a gift to be able to ponder it now. So for those who really did the experience or the experiments or the exercise, what did you discover? What theme ran through all 4 of these time frames? Was it the people you spent the time with? Was it the quality of presence that you would offer? What really stayed with you through this whole time? And this practice is simply to help remind ourselves that life was never given to us with a guarantee of our survival, but is instead a gift. And we do not need to wait until the end of our days to discover what matters most to us. And for many people who actually are forced to confront these end-of-life questions at the actual end of their lives, it's often too late to do much about it. And it's too jarring of a worldview shift and a shift of their values. So it's best to start now when you have plenty of time, what we think you have plenty of time, to right the ship, to course correct. And this can be your daily practice to remember and to connect with the greater picture. And the second point is, well, what did you discover? Most people who do this exercise, truthfully, authentically, they discover that, especially as you get even more focused from a year down to an hour, down to the last minute of your life, that you're not thinking about your legacy or your accomplishments or achievements anymore, but that instead you're actually focusing most on the experience of living, the emotions that you're experiencing are what make life life. That otherwise, without the emotions and without the experience from the inside, without what it's like to be in your own skin, as many achievers, especially entrepreneurial achievers, treat themselves as if they were some other third-party person that is trying to optimize that person's life, that person being you, thinking about them in a kind of abstract way, hoping that when this character in the sim that is you, that you're controlling, achieves enough points or trophies or whatever it is, then finally they will win the game. And finally they'll get to rest and experience all of the good stuff that they're hoping to experience instead of realizing that the experience has been happening all along the way, and that even when you get to the end of the game, so to speak, you don't get to have those experiences if you've been putting them off this whole time, because the accolades don't earn you the experience. And in fact, it's the experience and the emotions themselves that we're most after. And let me put it in a different way. Let me actually tell you a story about a very distinguished professor that I worked with very closely, and who at the time was the big name professor in the field I was working in. And she was appointed in 3 different departments at the university. She was a capital U, capital P university professor, a distinction given to only 20, or is it 21 professors in a university that had over 2,000 faculty members, over 2,000 professors. These were the top 1%. These professors were not beholden to any one department. They were not under the authority of any department chair. They reported directly to the university president, or was it the dean, someone much higher up in the administration. And they got to choose which department or which college they would have their offices in and so forth. And they had their own separate research budgets that were determined much higher up than anything at the department level. And out of the entire world, there were maybe only 3 professors. She is one of the top 3 in the entire world at that level. And I worked very closely with her as an undergraduate and then my first year as a grad student. And so I got to see her just because I was working also with her and her husband as their closest research assistant. I was able to observe her in her day-to-day life. And I even answered the phones for her for a while. And I was kind of the intermediary, kind of like a personal assistant. So I got to see the inside of how she operates her life. And she was very driven. She was always working on some projects, always had at least 3 projects on the go, a book in the publication stage, a book in the writing stage, a book or 2 or more in the researching stage, and a lot of just go, 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 go. And after I worked with her, about a year later, she passed away because she was a multiple cancer survivor, and it just kind of caught up to her. I think part of it was she just retired that year. And when you're that driven and you no longer have to show up to work, you kind of lose that drive, and that drive was sustaining her the whole time. I'm just putting this out as a hypothesis for this particular individual, but it's a common pattern among high-level achievers, not just entrepreneurial achievers, but achievers in general, that they're driven by kind of toxic achiever energy. And when you're no longer forced to do that, or the outer pressures, the external pressures are removed, the drive for continuing in your life is greatly reduced. And then all of the repressed energies that you were staving off through just that tortured, neurotic striving now come on, and you can't hold them back any longer. So she succumbed to illness a year later. And I was just thinking about, well, I should add this in. Then she had a replacement. And the replacement professor was also very senior. Obviously, it was a very senior position. The replacement wasn't given the university professorship, the UP, of the top 1%, but he was given a position that was across multiple departments and so forth. And then he passed away relatively recently, a few years ago. So I guess I've been around a long time since, it doesn't seem that long ago, but I guess it's several lifetimes ago for me actually being a beginning grad student like that. Do you struggle in your interactions with women or in your intimate relationship? Are fear, shame, or neediness sabotaging your relationships or attractiveness? In my Platinum Partnership Program, you'll discover how to transform your psychological issues, improve your success with women, and uncover your true self. Get access to all my current and future online courses by applying for the Platinum Partnership today at davidetiennephd.com/platinum. And now looking at her legacy, I remember even just a few years after her passing, I had a whole bookshelf on one of my shelves as a grad student, as a PhD student in my home, devoted to her books. And they were all signed and stuff. And even after she retired, she published some books, and she published a lot, like a dozen books, let's say. And they were all really influential at the time. Even just a few years later, other grad students coming through. And then they looked at my shelf and they're like, wow, she published a lot. I had no idea. And already her legacy was being forgotten. Now, how many years has it been? 30 years? No, not that long. 20 years later, I think very few people in the field who are doing research now, who are younger than 50, would actually even know of her or have read any of her work. And a lot of those who are reading her work and responding to it were her contemporaries or those who were assigned it because it was new. And it's so odd because at the time, my professional life, such as it was as an aspiring professor, revolved around this one individual. And it seemed like she was the big star. And now, just a short decade and two later, she's just a footnote, if that. And I'm seeing this among all of it. And then her replacement also. What was sad about it, in an interview after his passing and in his memorial, students were sharing that he had these retirement plans that sounded really nice. Finally, he could take a vacation with his wife and travel to these places that they've been meaning to enjoy. But every time he travels, he's going to a conference and he hardly gets to enjoy the city because he's just presenting papers and then attending other people's papers. And you know what it's like to travel for work, or especially for a conference, and kind of have the promise of being a tourist and visiting places of interest dangling in front of your eyes, but you just don't have the time. And putting it off. And then he also succumbed to illness and never got to enjoy that retirement plan. And just being reminded of you could, and then also to think about it from a biological, like from an animal's perspective, that there are species that are like these worker ants or worker bees that devote their entire existence to the collective, to the greater good. And when you think about it, like you could do it like a Bug's Life kind of thing, where you are a worker bee or a worker ant, and you sacrifice your life for the hive or whatever. And you're not like that. And there's a question of like, what's the inner life of a bee or whatever? Maybe you are actually devoting your life for some greater legacy down the road, hoping that you will be remembered as the inventor or creator of this thing. And then posthumously, you will derive some pleasure or significance from it, but you're dead. So you can't enjoy anything out of that. But this life that you have now, you derive some pleasure in the thought that others will be talking about you later on, about sharing about how awesome you were, and all thanks to you, we were able to enjoy this. And I know that that's a common theme among entrepreneurial achievers, this kind of legacy and the focus on legacy. And the fact of the matter is, no matter how hard you work at this thing, no matter what you sacrifice to it, your legacy and the amount of thought devoted to you, almost in every case, very, very likely, will be a small, minuscule percentage of the amount of sweat, blood, and tears you sacrificed to create it. You'll be like, who was it that made that? Oh yeah, that person. And if you just fast forward enough in time, that pleasure you could get from that legacy, because you're dead, so you're not going to get any pleasure out of it. That's an important point to make. Because actually in philosophy class, we think about that. Why do we care about what happens to our reputations posthumously? Like we still do. But it's obviously a fault of a quirk of our evolutionary heritage, of our needs, because obviously we can't derive any pleasure. We're dead. And yet we stupidly still want to have it. Just like we stupidly have not evolved a resistance to chocolate. Well, actually, chocolate's not as bad for you as, let's say, Krispy Kreme donuts. Well, that's my weakness. But whatever yours is, we've not evolved that because back in the day, what we are evolved and optimized for 100,000 years ago, life 50, 100,000 years ago, we didn't have to resist these sorts of things. And if you saw something that was like a Krispy Kreme donut, you better gobble it up because it'll probably go bad or you'll lose it. So we don't have that resistance. So this is kind of a quirk of our evolution. And it's the same with thinking about the future. Our genes want us to sacrifice all of this being present in the present and in the present enjoyment and the experience of love, because if we're driven and haunted by this need to strive, then we will get status. Status will get us more sexual opportunities, and we'll fuck, have lots and lots of babies, and then die. But our genes are happy because they've now spread. They don't actually give a fuck about your experience of your present life right now, because actually it would benefit them for you to be kind of driven and then just sow your seed as quick as and fast as and widely as possible. And that's one major strategy, especially from the male's perspective, of sticking around long enough, just 2 or 3 years, to make sure that the kids can fend for themselves and then moving on. And this does not lead to happiness. It is not for our benefit, but it'll be for your genes' benefit. But who would you like to live for? Just you optimizing, passing on your genes? Just like a worker bee, a worker ant, who's sacrificing his life for something, some legacy that he never even will enjoy. Or if you can pull yourself back from the precipice of what evolution or what our evolved instincts are pushing us towards, kind of miserable, self-sacrificial existence for an illusory legacy, then you can see it could have been, even if, let's even grant it to you, that you will have a great legacy. You'll have a whole paragraph in some textbook, the history textbook, right? And so you've spent your 80 years slaving away over this creation of whatever it is that you're now known for. And it's now just a paragraph in a textbook. Yeah. Okay. Or maybe they give you a whole chapter. And for you, that was your whole life. And now it's been encapsulated into one little chapter or paragraph or line or footnote, or not even there at all, which is much more likely. You still sacrificed your entire life for that. How worth it was it to you? And you'll notice that if you truly, honestly, authentically answer those end-of-life questions, none of that crap in the history textbooks will really matter unless you're incredibly driven still in the early period of your maturation emotionally and psychologically. And I do realize maybe some portion of my audience listening to this, some of you might have answered, what would really fire me up is all these people looking at me and adoring me. All right, so if that's you, maybe live a little longer and then come back. For the people I work with, especially those who are entrepreneurial achievers, generally will find me in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. It's brutally obvious what really matters, especially as we go from 1 year down to 1 minute. At that 1 minute mark, no one's thinking about, I wonder what people will write about me in the history books. And you'll notice then that the thing you're really dialing in on is, whose eyes am I looking into right now? And who do I want to feel my love and gratitude? And what message do I want to pass down to those I love the most? And you'll discover that the most powerful of emotions is what you're most yearning for and feeling in your heart as you look upon the eyes of those that you, what? Love. And that's the third point I want to make. The second being that we're focused on experiences and emotions, not the achievements or creations. And then the third is love. That I'm going to quote a really great meditator, a writer of meditations, Sarah Blondin. Don't forget how uncomplicated your life can be. A man on his deathbed held close to his heart his most beloved, breathed his last words to her as he closed his eyes. It was all so simple. He was speaking of love. Don't forget, you came to this earth to feel. Don't forget that what you are living right now in this very moment may be an answer to a prayer, that it may be the very way, the very path you need to walk down in order for you to receive what you quietly whisper to the wind. Don't forget to close your eyes, to breathe in the beauty that is you, to deepen your relationship with your quietest self. Plunge often into the comfort of your heartbeat. Take time to grow your love for yourself. There's nothing more precious, more valuable, more sustaining than the love you have for yourself. Don't forget how uncomplicated your life can be. That you, my dear friend, came here to love. And if given the chance, you would do it all over again. Only this time, to choose more of the love you denied the first time. Don't forget how uncomplicated your life can be. Don't wait until your last breath to remember how simple it all was. And I'll leave it for you there. I've done a lot of episodes on how the meaning of life really, if you really sit with it and think through it, the meaning of life for human beings can really only come down to love. But instead of arguing for it philosophically, it's always more powerful to give you an experience from the inside. And maybe this gave you a little bit of that. It can be more powerful when we're in a kind of meditative state in a private therapy session or in the meditations. This is drawing from 2 different meditative exercises that I've provided for our guys in our Platinum Partnership and even in our Legendary coaching group. So if this is something that interests you, those are some resources that you can take advantage of, especially the Platinum Partnership gives you access to everything, all the online courses I've ever made. If you're an entrepreneurial achiever, it might be something you'd be interested in to pursue these questions for yourself and explore some of the childhood patterns that you've developed that are maybe unconsciously driving you that you're not aware of. And private therapy would be a great way to do that. I have a private practice. If you're interested, you can write to support@auradating.com to inquire about availability. Okay, so just before I leave here, I just want to leave you with a story of a client named Richard. And Richard came of age at a time when his parents were arguing a lot in front of him. And he stepped in as like in middle school age to kind of mediate their divorce. And at the time, he was responsible for keeping them, he felt, and actually was in many ways responsible for keeping them together for an extra 10, 15 years. And that was his role in the family as a kind of peacekeeper, a mediator at a very young age, already a parentified child. And it took him many months to come to terms with that because he was seeing me in his late 60s, already having achieved incredible amounts and now coming out of his 3rd marriage, an incredibly successful entrepreneurial achiever, and coming to terms with how poorly parented he was, how much his parents relied on him to take care of their emotions, and how they expected him to grow up much faster than he ought to have been, and what by rights any child would be considered a natural and healthy development of a child. And growing up with that kind of pleaser, healer role ended up in relationship after relationship that was doomed. But because of that doomed dynamic, and especially also imbibing his parents' value system of achievement, that self-worth comes from achievement and value, that the more value you can create, the more worthy of love you are, because that's what their whole family, the extended family, bought into. So he bought into that as well, then being attracted to women who on the outside had all kinds of success, but on the inside, he knew unconsciously would require him to caretake, because that's the dynamic he grew up with, and it's the only one he knew. And it's the role that he played, and he became that character. These are his default parts. And over, it eventually got to the point where he couldn't save it again, but he felt like it was his responsibility. And this childhood pattern, it took him 6 decades to see it, and a lot of work and a lot of courage for him to face. And through the therapeutic process, he is coming to see this and unburden himself, his parts from these legacy burdens, these thoughts and beliefs and emotions and value systems that were passed down to him that he can let go of. And finally allowing himself to feel that unconditional love for himself and all of his parts that he repressed, ignored, didn't even think were there. And slowly over the process of the therapeutic journey, discovering this power of his higher self and the natural overflowing love that comes from himself to his own parts that he's disowned. And then moving into now this fullness of life, late in life, but not too late. And then one other example, client named Paul, who is younger, in his 30s, but was coming into business under the shadow of his father, who was a very successful entrepreneur, who was driven in a kind of tortured, neurotic way to succeed, and passed that same value system down to his son, Paul. And Paul now seeing that in every relationship, he was finding himself recreating that dynamic of not feeling good enough because his dad always made him feel not good enough. That's how he That's a position he put himself into in his interpretation of what dad was saying. And he was recreating that dynamic. Also a mediator in his parents' divorce, because his father was requiring him to translate and to mediate and get his mother to agree to the various points in the divorce agreement. And then he, at a very young age, also middle school, around that age, having to step in and take that role of protecting mom from dad, but being dad's mouthpiece to mom, which is a very complex arrangement. And then recreating that in his relationships and dating toxic woman after toxic woman who was using him like emotional vampire women would. And finally, through many sessions of healing, one by one, these inner child parts that were parentified and were caretaking his parents' emotions and taking responsibility, especially for his mother's well-being as a young child. He was able to unburden them of those, and now also able to step into the fullness of his independence. And now at the moment, enjoying being free from that and not rushing into another relationship and seeing that relationship as a successful relationship, especially a power couple kind of relationship that he could show off as being a way of marking his success in life, being free of all of those toxic standards, to finally be loving and comfortable with himself and giving himself that love that he so desperately craved, now frees him up to truly love others. And sensing that, he's in no rush to commit to any one woman yet, because he's already experiencing all the love that he was in the previous relationship so desperate to get. And now he's in the best position, in fact, now, because he fully loves himself and is able to meet his needs at the moment. And every week we're discovering more points of growth. But at the moment, able to meet all of his own needs, he's at the perfect position to correctly evaluate and judge the women that he's meeting, to see whether they are, in fact, the right person to invest his energy and time into. And in fact, it won't feel like an investment from him anymore, because it will be a natural outgrowth of the overflowing love that he has for himself. And I've shared about what it's like to be in an unconditional love relationship, and which is a really important thing to understand, especially for achievers, because it's hard for them to imagine what it's like to not be desperately driven, to have someone else fulfill you, to have someone else tell you you're good enough, to have someone else meet your need for love for you. And it seems so foreign. So I have other episodes on unconditional love. You just Google search or YouTube search or whatever that is, unconditional love, David Tien, you'll find a whole bunch. And I can attack this notion of the myth of the value love myth purely intellectually, philosophically. I found that is not as effective, not nearly as effective as giving the experience from the inside. And hopefully I've done some of that here. This is the aim of asking those questions, going real slow, pausing enough to give you that reflective experience that you can have in a podcast. And in the next episode, come back for that. I'll be getting into the more of the nitty-gritty hows, the how-tos, giving some practical tips on how to actually go through the therapeutic process to be free of the value love myth. And if you liked this episode, please share it with anyone you think would benefit from it. Give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. And thank you so much for all those who've been giving feedback. I really value that. So if you have any feedback at all, just put them into the comments wherever you're seeing this, and let me know what you think. All right. So thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. David Tien, signing out.